We're in a market where scale is, essential to success in a lot of ways. You just start with just buying things in bulk. If you're still publishing print journals, it's a lot cheaper to buy lots of paper than, paper for one journal. Hosting, you can amortize your platform across 1,000 journals means it costs a lot less per journal.
Hello and welcome to Insights XChange, the podcast where we explore the forces shaping research, publishing, policy, and innovation. I'm Nikesh Gosalia, and today we are looking at fundamental question for scholarly publishing. As the industry continues to scale and consolidate, how do we ensure it remains sustainable, trusted, and aligned with the needs of research communities? Joining us today is David Crotty. David's the executive director of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press, an internationally renowned publisher in the life sciences. He brings deep experience across editorial leadership, journal policy, and strategic consulting, with previous roles at Oxford University Press and Clark & Esposito. Trained as a geneticist, he began his career in research before moving into publishing, and today is widely recognized for his thoughtful perspectives on industry trends through his writing and leadership roles. David, welcome to Insights XChange.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, David. So let's talk a little bit about your career. I've obviously seen you on podiums and your scholarly kitchen pieces, and obviously interacted a little bit with you as well. But your career spans research, editorial leadership, and strategic consulting. How has your scientific background shaped the way you think about publishing strategy and innovation?
Yeah, I often tell people that I'm this rare person who has sort of played every single role in the scholarly communications workflow. Essentially, I've been a reader of journals. I've been an author in journals. I've been a peer reviewer for journals. I've been an editor in chief of a journal. I've been a managing editor. I've been a publisher. I've been a publishing consultant. I've been now I'm a director of a publishing. So I've sort of at least had a hand in or some experience in at pretty much every level along the way, which I think has been super, super helpful in just understanding, how things work and what the different jobs are and who needs what. But to get back to your question though, of I think the scientific grounding is really important. And it's a question that sort of comes up a lot, when people talk about the value of a degree. There's this sort of idea of, well, I think in the life sciences, the last article I saw said something like, 8% of people who get a biology PhD end up in a tenure track position at a university. And at least when I was in graduate school, that was the goal. Everyone, assumed that was what you wanted. If you took a job in industry, you had sold out. Which is, I used to give talks, alternative career talks of what would it, if you didn't stay in science and you became a publisher, this is an alternative career. And now I just give career talks. The alternative has really become staying at the university. I still have found, throughout my career, just an incredible value in the training that I received in experimental design and looking at, understanding controls, understanding how to ask questions, how to set up an experiment that actually will inform what you do. And I think that skill set translates enormously across a lot of different areas, certainly in business of, okay, we want to try this open access model on this journal. How are we going to decide if it's a success or not? That's an experiment. You need, to understand how to design an experiment that will actually tell you something and tell you something meaningful. I would say the other piece of it is coming into science publishing after a postdoc. I in a lot of ways, I always felt I was behind a lot of my peers because I had spent 10 years or so getting a degree and doing postdoctoral research. But in some ways I was ahead of them because, having that PhD after your name buys you a lot of credibility, often with scientific editors and authors. And just also, being able to speak the language of the content of the journals and with the people you're talking with was really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, David. And obviously, I knew about a few roles, but I wasn't aware of, almost every role that you've played. So that's extremely
well. I'm back at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press, where I started my publishing career, and we're a small house.
Yeah.
We publish 8 journals, and I don't know, a dozen books a year, but we're a very small house. We have 31 full-time employees, which is very, very lean. I was recently talking to other small publishers, and they have way more employees than we do. But because of that, you have to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And it can be valuable in your career development of doing different jobs and seeing, well, what does that mean if I'm going to help on book cover design this week, or I'm going to go talk to the advertising salesperson about how they're selling ads. It's just the more you learn, the more you're better prepared to do further things up the ladder.
Absolutely. Talking about the scholarly publishing market, of course, over the years, and even especially during your stint as a consultant, I know that you've written a lot of pieces about just the trends and where we are heading. It has also become increasingly concentrated over the last 2 decades. From your perspective, David, what do you see as the biggest long-term implication of this market consolidation, both for the research communities, but also for the smaller niche society publishers?
Yeah. It's we're in a market where scale is, is essential to success in a lot of ways. You just start with just buying things in bulk. If you're still publishing print journals, it's a lot cheaper to buy lots of paper than, paper for one journal. Hosting, you can amortize your platform across 1,000 journals, means it costs a lot less per journal than it does if you have 8 journals. They each have to carry a bigger share. So you have, the cost benefits of scale. So start with that. And then, there's so many other ways that scale is helping the larger publishers out. You think of we're in this sort of, we call it, transfer strategy world, where it used to be, for journals like at Cold Spring Harbor, we have, very high end, some of the top genetics journals. So it used to be, a researcher might send their paper to Nature or Cell, and if it didn't get into Nature, then they would look at the top field specific journal. You send it to a general journal, top impact factor, doesn't get in there. Well, what are the field specific journals? But now you send a paper to Nature, doesn't get in Nature, it goes to Nature Genetics, Nature Medicine, doesn't get in there, goes down to Nature Communications, doesn't there, goes to a communications journal, doesn't get in there, goes to Scientific Reports. So there's a gravity to that program that papers no longer escape. So, we're seeing, across the board of societies I've worked with that have field specific journals are seeing declines in submissions over time, just simply because the things that used to come to them are now being subsumed by these large portfolios where nothing escapes from. And then you also have things like, it used to just be the big deal. Now it's transformative agreements. Used to be, difficult as an independent publisher because the big deal where a publisher sells a package of all of their journals to a library has eating up more and more of a library's budget. And what if the library suddenly hits on hard times, or the university says you need to save $10,000, if I cancel a journal in a large package, that large package still costs the same. So a small independent journal suddenly becomes, well, if I cancel that one, I actually get the money back. So you're much more vulnerable. And now we have transformative agreements, which combine subscription access with open access payments for the researchers at a university, which only makes sense at scale because, one, librarians have limited time. So are they going to spend time talking to me for 8 journals, or would they rather spend time talking to Elsevier for thousands and thousands of journals? Further, if I'm a society that publishes one journal and I go to a university, there are probably not going to be a huge number of papers coming out from that university in my one journal per year. It's, transformative agreements are complicated, difficult to negotiate, take a lot of monitoring. For a handful of papers a year in one journal, it's probably not worth the effort. It's more cost effective to just pay an author's APCs at that point. But for thousands of journals, suddenly it makes sense. So the new favored business models, again, they work much better at scale than they do. And they also now give an advantage to journals that are in a transformative agreement, because if I'm an author and I have to publish an open access article and I have two journals to choose from, and one, it's not going to cost me anything because it's in a transformative agreement, and the other one, it's thousands of dollars are coming out of my research budget, I'm going to go with the free one, probably, all other things being equal. So another advantage, granted to the scale. So it is increasingly difficult to be an independent publisher. It has been for a while, and it's getting, harder and harder. It's, it's problematic. And, I always come back to a, biologist mindset of, an environment that has more diversity in it is better able to weather environmental shocks and changes than one that has a smaller number of very like organisms in it. So the more we consolidate down into a small number of organizations that operate the same way, the less shock resistant we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so in that environment, first of all, do you see, and if so, what kind of meaningful opportunities are out there for, say, independent presses or niche society publishers to thrive?
Yeah, well, it is more difficult, but to me, there are still advantages for a lot of, particularly, the society publishers, and in our case, a publisher that's associated with a not-for-profit research institution. The advantage we have over an Elsevier, over a Wiley, is that we actually have community. And in a lot of ways, a journal is the essential function of a journal is a community of experts in conversation with one another. And a research society has its membership. It has its meetings. It has a community sort of, built in to the nature of things. And there are advantages of, if I need peer reviewers, people are more dedicated to their community than they are to a corporation. The same goes to, Cold Spring Harbor on a different scale. We have a huge meetings program. We have a courses program. There's a long history of research here. So we are more connected in some ways than Springer Nature might be to a researcher. So there are still pieces of that, the advantages there. There's also a piece of it. There's a freedom in some ways of not being beholden to stakeholders. Again, I work for a not-for-profit research institution. My main mission that has been given to me is to do good things for science, to publish things that improve the practice of science. Our books program doesn't make much money, but, we can do a lot of things. We have a lot of freedom to, don't lose a lot of money on this and it'll be really good for science, or we'll preserve an important piece of the history of science. So there's a freedom there that you can get from a university press or a not-for-profit that you don't necessarily have when you have to worry about the next quarter's stock price. At the same time, there is still a financial responsibility. We supply any surplus we make goes to the university to fund, or to the institution to fund research. And in a time where grant funding is shakier than ever, that money is really important to the institution. So we do still have a fiduciary duty, but it is more balanced with mission necessarily than you might have at a place where a commercial publisher, where your ultimate responsibility is to your shareholders.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talking a little bit about impact, in your consulting work, you've worked closely with journals, presses. What are some strategies you found to be genuinely effective, the kind that actually create impact rather than maybe, just looking at it as an activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was talking with someone else this morning at a research society, and one of the, you know, probably the first most important thing is that, a journal's program has to be actively managed. And there's still a lot of research societies out there who are sort of in the position of, well, we published all the Nobel Prize winning papers from the 1980s and the 1990s. So we're just going to keep doing what we've always been doing, and then you look at their subscriptions and their revenue and their submissions are all sort of going down over time. So, it's a highly competitive environment. What you're doing has to be actively managed. You need to have a strategy in place. You need to, constantly be evaluating what you're doing and trying to make improvements. So that's, the most basic piece of things is, make the effort. Don't just say status quo is fine and we'll just keep rolling along. I think the second pieces are, and I mentioned it earlier, is, there are two pieces of portfolio strategy and transfer strategy. And portfolio strategy is sort of the art of of managing your entire portfolio of journals as one cohesive whole. And one of the problems you run into a lot of you have a handful of journals that all sort of run independently within the same organization, and each is its own little siloed niche, and they often end up competing against one another rather than collaborating. So a lot of the work we did at Clark and Esposito when I was there, and that they're still doing now, is sort of retraining that mindset of these are all part of a whole. Can we make the whole, greater than the sum of the parts? Can we find synergies between them in ways that they amplify one another and improve one another, and that they don't step, let's define the scope of each journal. Let's define where it sits in the hierarchy of journals so everybody knows what everybody else is doing and what's appropriate for each one, and we're not sort of cannibalizing our own business. And then with that, you sort of enable transfer strategy, which I mentioned earlier, which is the idea that if a good paper comes into, a paper that has good research, quality research comes into one of our journals, even if it's not appropriate for that journal, can we find a place for that to publish that paper rather than letting it escape off to one of our competitors, which, I think I mentioned the Nature portfolio is sort of the apex predator in that, in that realm of they have really just perfected that sort of hierarchical cascade flow of research papers.
During your time at Oxford University Press, you led journal policy and innovation. From that vantage point, what do you think are the most important editorial policy shifts that publishers should be considering right now to support trust, quality, and discoverability?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to give you a specific definition because we're in such a, transitional period. And although I say that, I realized recently that pretty much every talk or thing I've written in the last, 10 to 15 years starts with, scholarly publishing is undergoing an unprecedented period of rapid change. And now I'm kind of like, well, is it an unprecedented period if it's been going on for 15 years, or is this just the world we live in? So, there's a piece of it of, being flexible and understanding that things are continuously changing. It gets back to that sort of active management. I think policy-wise, I think, the biggest shifts have really just been the funders getting more involved, putting restrictions on researchers on how they can publish their work. There's kind of, when I was with Clark and Esposito, I was helping write the brief, and we wrote about this sort of circle that goes around and around of someone gets in a funder's ear and says, knowledge is a public good, everything should be free. And they say, hey, that's right, everything should be free. And they get convinced that, author pays, open access is the answer to everything. They jump onto that bandwagon. Then they encounter all the exact problems and issues that model comes with, which, they were all predicted and we're all told, well, if you do that, it's a model that relieves inequities in some areas, but just kind of shifts them off the reader onto the author. And so then they sort of reach a point where they're suddenly, if you look at going back to the RCUK policy in 2013 or so. And then you had Plan S went through that same cycle of, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to solve all these problems. And now Plan S is kind of like, well, that didn't work. We need to come up with something different. And now you have the U.S., federal funding agencies who have just recently sort of launched into that, that same cycle. They're going to go through the same thing. So, so I think understanding their, trying to meet the needs of the research community, of the researchers, this is what we do, and if you want to, it's a competitive advantage if you can have, meet the needs of your customers, whether those are readers or authors. One of the big shifts we've seen also is the importance of author experience. Used to be, you're running a subscription journal. Your readers are your customers. Your direct customers are the libraries who subscribe. So all of your work is to make the librarian's life better and to just publish the stuff that the readers want. And now in an open access world, increasingly the authors are your customers. So, and whether you're running an open access journal or not, you are now competing against open access journals for those same authors. So what you can do to improve the author experience is important. Look at your submission process. Are there any hurdles that you can, are you asking them for things you don't really need? Are there things you can push down the line so authors don't have to worry about that until they're actually really going to be accepted in your journals? Are they reformatting references before you'll even look at them? I'm going to spend a week reformatting my references and then get dust rejected in an hour by the editor. That's work you don't need to make people do. Treating your authors well, helping them market their papers after they come out, just making the process better. And ultimately, you want the any author who comes to your journal, rejected or accepted, to say, that was I had a good experience. They took decent care of me. I would send my next paper there. And if the person in the lab next to me asks, would you send it? Should I send my paper to this journal? Then I would recommend this one. And that's been a lot of focus as well.
That's a great point, David. Talking about maybe one of the recent challenges that possibly all publishers are facing, I think everyone's been reporting huge increase in number of submissions, and possibly a lot of that is AI slop. And there's a lot of conversation around, technology once again. You've written quite a bit about emerging tools and practices, often with a balanced perspective, a mix of maybe some element of skepticism and curiosity as well. So, just it'll be interesting to get your perspective, David, from this point onwards. I mean, how should we as a community maybe, or even, specifically publishers, evaluate technologies like AI or other semantic tools without being too swayed by, hype or on both the extremities? Not get too overwhelmed at the same time, not too exuberant as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you said skepticism and not cynicism, because there's a line you don't want to cross over. I mean, I've been in publishing for 25 years, and there's been a constant flow of, again, if it gets back to people who get PhDs don't necessarily have career opportunities in the industry. So one of the routes that has really arisen is, well, I'm going to do a startup company and fix the thing that I found to be a real pain when I was a researcher. And often that is, publishing. And so they say, all right, I hated having to go through this thing in the submission process, or I hate it, or we had a real problem with this, so I'm going to make a tool. And a lot of these are people who don't necessarily have experience in publishing. A lot of it, they're just kind of reinventing the wheel. You see a lot of things like that. You see a lot of new ideas that just maybe aren't well thought through. And so, very few of them continue to exist. A lot of them just get bought and get subsumed into something else. I think Joe Esposito wrote a great piece many years ago in the Scholarly Kitchen of, is it a feature? Is it a product? Is it a business? And, I tend to think about things that way of like, well, this is not a standalone thing. This would be part of a larger tool. This would actually be its own little tool that would be part of a suite of tools, or this is an entire business on its own. And fewer and fewer as you sort of climb up that hierarchy. I also think there's very rarely an advantage for a lot of these things in being the first mover. There's value in a lot of these tools, but there's sort of, a point where they have that value gets proven and it starts being accepted. And I think you see a lot of like the larger publishers will trial everything. And there's it's almost a marketing mindset to it. And particularly if I was doing, journal acquisition when I was at Oxford of, signing, independent journals or journals who with another publisher looking for a publishing partner. And there's a piece of that where you go in and you talk to the research societies who own the journal and you give the sort of dog and pony show of like, here's what your journal is going to look like on our platform. And there's a piece of that where, oh, look, we've got this cool peer review tool that does this, and we've got this tool that does this, and you can make visual abstracts using this tool. And so, none of those tools end up being used very much. And there's a cycle of, okay, we're trialing that. Well, nobody liked it. And we'll trial the next one, we'll trial the next one. But there's almost a value in them for the larger publishers in saying, hey, look at all these flashy things that you can have for your journal. Come, sign a 5-year or 10-year contract with us. And so that, I always felt that was some of the value that some of the reasons some of the larger publishers did these trials. It's also, capacity, I think, is a thing also for a smaller publisher. If you're going to do any of these new things, you need to actually do them. You need to have someone to take advantage of them and to analyze the data and to really, make an effort, which is harder to do. We're a small, lean organization. It's harder to do. So I think there's a lot, keeping an eye on other folks, seeing what they're doing with it. It does something, prove its value over time. Yes, then okay. I'm also a big fan of things like the STM Integrity Hub, where, and I think there are places where we are better working collectively than individually and competing. So, I'm impressed with that. And then you asked AI, I'm like everybody else. I have no idea what to think of AI. Angela Cochran and Todd Toller wrote a great Scholarly Kitchen piece recently of the conversations they've been having. And I'm waiting for part 2 of that to come in. But there's a guy named Anil Dash who wrote a piece that always has stuck in my mind, that the way, there's a difference between the people who are serious technologists and how they think about AI versus the CEOs who you see in the newspapers and online all the time who are trying to sell you on AI. And the serious thought about it is this is an incredibly valuable tool that can be used to create very focused products that serve a particular purpose. And it is not, no one takes serious the idea of this is the God machine that will do all of your thinking for you. And, in the world of science, it's, well, this is going to come up with an idea for your research, and it's going to do design the experiments and do the experiments and write your paper for you. That's what's useful about AI. AI is more, I can use this in a very targeted way to answer specific questions or build a tool to do specific tasks. In science, if you think about, AlphaFold has been revolutionary for predicting protein structures. And publishing workflow of some of these, tedious, mind-numbing tasks that we have to do. Well, if AI can cover that, then I can free my human beings to do the things where actual judgment is needed. And I think in the end, there's still a very human piece of what we do, and a human piece of research, and it requires creativity and thoughtfulness, which is not something these tools can provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think in the near future, and the near future could be 5 years or so, David, do you think we'll get better at in that area, or is it going to be, kind of limited usage? And yeah.
I think it's going to be all over the place, and you'll see different people trying different things and allowing different things, and people trying to sneak through different things. Ultimately, I saw someone online was talking about, well, if you're asked to do peer review and you're just going to use ChatGPT to do the review for you, then you should quit your job and give it to someone who actually wants to be a scientist. So there was that piece of it. I am also, a firm believer in, there's I think a lot of the AI, it sort of averages things out. We're going to take all of what we know and we're going to come up with the most likely thing. So you're ending up with this sort of average. And I think there's there's real importance in the extremes, in things that you're never, average is boring. It's I guess some of it. And the variability also of thinking about, when I send a paper out for peer review, it's going to 3 individuals, and really depending on how I select those individuals and who I select them, I'm going to get very different things back from that. And it's not a perfect system, and it's not going to give you the exact right answer every time. But I think getting that range of information and response back is really important. And again, maybe I'm just old and a curmudgeon, but I still think there's a really important human judgment element in everything we do. And it's, I think there's long been, we'll get back to the impact factor. There's been this desire, particularly in the world of science, of, things are more meaningful if I can put it on a mathematical scale. If I have numbers, and this is a 4.2 impact factor versus a 4.3, well, a 4.3 impact factor must be a better paper because it's in a better journal. And the reality is you're asking a lot of qualitative questions. You're not asking quantitative questions for, statistical review and things like that. I get that. But realistically, the decision that an editor is making is this good work? Is this important work? And those are qualitative questions. Those are opinions. And publication in a journal is, to me, the equivalent of a letter of recommendation. The editor of this journal and their handpicked peer reviewers said, this is of a high enough level of quality that it deserves to be in this journal. Now, what that level of quality is entirely subjective to my opinion of that journal. And I may look at a journal and say, well, they publish a lot of garbage, so that letter of recommendation doesn't mean much to me. Or I look at a journal and say, this is the key journal for my field and it publishes great work all the time. This means a lot to me. It's like getting a letter of recommendation for a job of, who's it from matters, and what are they saying about that person? So, I tend to think there's a fuzziness that upsets people, and a qualitative decision and an opinion decision towards, things that people don't necessarily want to acknowledge. They want this nice, neat numbered list of this is better than this because it has a higher score.
So a couple of thoughts. I just want to call out, David, I think I love the point you made, and I'm going to look back at that piece as well. But, is this a feature, a product, or a business? And talking about startups, I also love the fact that you mentioned it's a lot of folks who've kind of maybe experienced this and are looking to start with a really good intention to solve this problem. But just a question that popped in my head, and sometimes I just wonder if it is just unique to our industry. Do you feel that for startups, it's particularly more difficult in our industry to have that sort of runway to scale up? I sometimes just feel it is it's painstakingly slow to run trials and pilots, with publishers, with societies. They would have their own priorities, of course. They would take their own time. And then after that, you still don't know the outcome. So you need a much longer runway.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've probably not kind of, seen a lot of other industries. What is your thought on that, David? Do you think it's a little bit more difficult here, or that's true for any other industry?
It probably varies quite a lot. It really depends on what the that product here we're talking about. A lot of these things are features, they're not standalone, certainly it's not standalone businesses. In any startup world, there is a very successful business model of, I'm going to build this thing, I'm going to get a lot of attention for it, and then I'm going to sell it to someone else, and actually making money from it is their problem. And, if you think of, in our industry, something like Mendeley, or a lot of these things that get purchased by a larger publisher. I mean, the guys who founded Mendeley had a great idea. They built a product. It got, really popular. They cashed out, and sold it off to Elsevier and did really, really well for themselves. And actually, those guys have gone on and started a couple other projects that have been really successful as well. Really, really smart people. But there's a piece of it of, the long term, running a business piece of it is less is less the goal. I always go back to Mark Cuban of, he sold broadcast.com to Yahoo for, I don't know how many billions of dollars, and, has lived off that ever since. And that's the ultimate business model, is get somebody else to, pay you lots of money for it. Then they can worry about actually turning it into a profitable business.
Yeah. Very interesting. Also, maybe kind of jumping a couple of questions, but because you already mentioned that, David, a lot of what you mentioned or write is much about people and judgment as much it is about systems and technology. From your perspective, we as an industry, what do you think? Are we under investing in any of these areas? And if so, what should we be prioritizing instead?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because we're under these two competing pressures of everything you do is too expensive. APCs are too high. Subscription prices are too high. This is ridiculous. You're way too expensive. Also, I need you to do 100 extra things that you're not doing now, which are all very labor intensive and technology intensive. So, you have to be very careful in where and how you invest, and you have to be as efficient as possible. I mean, this is basically what I've been doing for the last couple. I came to Cold Spring Harbor, and it's a long running press, and my predecessor and former mentor, John Ingalls, has been running the press since 1987. So there's a lot of, we do things the way we do things because it has evolved over time, and this is the absolute most efficient way to do things. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes we just do things because that's how we've always done things. So I think there's a lot of efficiency to be gained, and that's really useful. I see a lot of constant development. I think it's tough with the human side of things. You see a lot of what used to be done in-house is now outsourced for a lot of companies, which has varying degrees of success. Some of it has been wildly successful, and the quality has been, absolutely perfectly maintained, if not improved. Other things, it's just, I don't know of any editorial office that is happy with their copy editing, at this point. And I've also heard publishers make the argument of it doesn't really matter. Authors don't care, readers don't care if there's a typo here and there. I still think it matters because I grew up as an editor, and it always bothers me. But I do see, you do see a lot of technological development going on. Again, right now it's very focused on research integrity, and I think people are working really hard on the AI front of things, both internally of, how can we make our processes more efficient and use these tools effectively internally, but also looking more broadly in that sort of area. And are we the people who should build these tools ourselves? You look at Elsevier, who are building their own clinical tool based on their journals and the journals they've been able to license, versus are we just going to be the feed mechanism for Anthropic or OpenAI?
Absolutely. Yeah. Talking about open access, David, it continues to reshape, if I may say so, the industry, but not always in ways that it reduces costs or improves equity. How do you see the future of open access evolving for journals, for books, and what should the community be watching out for? In your opinion, is it time to move beyond the whole discussion around OA versus subscription and focus more on sustainability, the real value of it?
My argument that I continuously make is we are in a fragmented market, and we are going to be in a fragmented market, I would say, at least for the next decade. And so you are in trouble if you have all of your eggs in one basket. So there are particular fields, particular geographies where author pays open access works really, really well. There's lots of funding. Everybody's on board with it. Great. But you're then shutting out areas of the world or other fields, and the humanities don't have, nobody has a $1 million grant, as a historian. So how am I going to pay a $10,000 APC? The U.S. federal funders have their policies. You've got Plan S in Europe, and then you have China, which is increasingly hugely important market, and they don't have an open access policy, and they just have. I don't think it's officially out yet, but there's a a list floating around of 34 open access journals that are too expensive that the Chinese Academy of Sciences isn't going to pay an APC for. So suddenly, if all you have are expensive open access journals, then you're shut out of that market. But if you have some open access journals and some hybrid journals and different, or an S2O journal here, or a Diamond Open, if you have that sort of diverse portfolio, then you're better suited because you can meet a lot of different authors' needs in different parts of the community. Again, I'm back to evolutionary biology of diversity is a healthy, creates a healthy ecosystem. And so for me, it's diversifying your portfolio, and whether that's investment advice or editorial advice, of having a lot of different things. And working with research societies also about thinking about a typical research society makes money in three ways. Membership dues, which are usually a small portion of things, their annual meeting or meetings program, and their publications. Making sure the other two are also robust, so in case something happens to the third one, you're still okay. But also looking for different ways to make money. Again, more diversity, more options, and again, you're better suited for shocks and storms in the market if you have a lot of different things going on. So that's there's that sort of piece. Yeah, I mean, open access, if it was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it 25 years ago. And we go through. Author Pays has been really successful. It's made a lot of money particularly for the commercial publishers. People still have this weird early 2000s mindset of, Elsevier and Wiley and Springer Nature hate open access and they're the enemies of open access. And nothing could be further from the truth. They are making a fortune off open access and they love open access. And, so I keep seeing, this must be an Elsevier lobbyist trying to stop this open access policy. And the reality is, no, Elsevier's open access is great. You know what? If that's what the community wants, we'll supply it. And they're doing really, really well with it. I don't know. I don't think there's an easy solution. If there was an easy solution, we'd have had it by now. So, to me, I'm trying to make the long-term bet that quality matters over quantity. And as we are increasing in this world of more and more information and disinformation and malinformation, curation is what matters. And that's what people will pay for in the long run. And it's, and it maybe in the short term, we're not as attractive a publisher because we don't have a journal that publishes, 10,000 articles that gets a big APC from all of them and brings in tens of millions of dollars. But I think over the long term, doing the right thing, focusing on quality is eventually what's going to matter. I mean, I also feel like there's a point where a journal becomes unmanageable as well. I think, Scientific Reports published 45,000 articles last year. What is the average quality control on any individual article? I have no idea. I don't know how you do that. I think there's a point where it just gets out of your hands and you get what you get. And I don't, I think there's, you can have a big journal, but I think there's some tipping point where it no longer becomes manageable. I think a lot of the big journals may be in for a reckoning once, people really see what they're publishing. I think a lot of stuff gets published that doesn't necessarily get read. So, that's not the part of the business I necessarily want to be in. And I think longer term, the actual curation is really what's going to matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And talking about long term, David, maybe my final question to you, and it doesn't have to be necessarily related to technology, but what is one shift in scholarly publishing, whether it could be structural or cultural or even technology for that matter, that the industry may be underestimating today, but could prove to be very pivotal?
There are a couple pieces, and I think what we really have always strived for and what we want, and I think we could do much better and will become better in the future is really this idea of we want reliability. We want reproducibility. We want, what we put out to be accurate. And, I think we struggle right now because a lot of that's been pushed on to the publishers, and we're kind of the policemen who come in after the crime has been committed. And, I'd like to see a lot of this pushed further up the line. And can we stop this stuff before it happens? That would take significant investment and actually the universities, caring about these things a little more than they seem to. But I think there are other pieces of it that we can address. We talk about the Nelson memo and its impact on the publishing world, but that's only half the Nelson memo. The first half of the Nelson memo is, papers need to be freely available. And that is a very small task. We have routes to make that happen. Doesn't cost that much money if you took every, funded paper and paid an average APC, not a huge part of the overall research budget. But the other half of that is data availability. And that is an enormous undertaking. I think people don't quite understand the volume of data that gets collected, the infrastructure that would be needed for it. And along with that, I've pushed for years this idea of open methods. And I think one of the real failings we have as a community and an industry is that we've chopped those methods sections down so much that, and some of this is my bias because I was editor in chief of a biology methods journal that published protocols. But having detailed protocols of how you did what you did is much more meaningful to me than looking at your data, because your data could be garbage, and I don't care. It looks beautiful, but if I don't know how you collected it, then I can't trust it. And very often scientific data is collected to answer a very specific question under very specific conditions. So I can only reuse it so much, whereas your methods I can adapt and do something new with. So I there is a future with and I see this ongoing really important role of the scientific paper. It serves a very important need. People want a nice, concise encapsulation of a research project. Here's what we did. Here's what we learned. I can read it fairly quickly. If it's really important to me, I can go into great depth and read it over time. And that everything you see people propose of the future of research reporting sort of ignores that function. And I tend to think of the future of publishing and research science, research communication, I wanted to say just science, as a yes and question of, okay, we've got, 350 years of journal articles. It's this highly evolved form that serves a very specific purpose. So you need to keep that purpose, even if you replace the paper, or let's just keep the paper and build out things from that. So data availability, methods, preprints fall into that as well. Of, think of a hub with, the paper at the center of that and different spokes going off to different research output. Here's the code that I used. Here's, the videos that I took. Here's a presentation of my work if you want to get it that way. With the paper as this object in the middle, and then all the connecting pieces around that if I want to go deeper into the research and and also adding to its validity, the more trust signals I can add onto it.
Thank you for sharing that. And the final question, I promise, and more of personal curiosity for me, David.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy the unique posts that you do on Scholarly Kitchen, and sometimes I have to be very honest. Sometimes I really feel like, okay, I don't want to read about the trends or the technical stuff or I just don't have the the brain capacity to do. And I know that you read a lot. I know that you're very curious, but I just wanted to I've always been curious to know, how do you come up with those? I mean, is it?
So you're talking like the sort of Friday fun posts?
Yeah, but those are really good, David. Well, yeah.
Well, we haven't been doing a lot of them lately, just because we have so many. One of the things we've tried to do at the Scholarly Kitchen is, I think I took it on, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago from the guy who founded it. And, and I came into it, and it's kind of the mindset I've had, with journals as well of if I'm an editor of the journal, this is not my journal. This belongs to the society. This belongs to the, the publisher that owns it. And I'm the caretaker of it. Scholarly Kitchen is the same thing. It's not my blog. It's the SSP's blog, and what did they want from it? What purpose does it serve there? And the mission was really to reflect the SSP community. And so we've worked really hard on that. We've brought in try to get a very diverse group of our regular bloggers from different geographies and genders, and get better representation of the community. And that I think we've done a good job with. And then the second piece was the guest post of can we provide a place for a lot of because blogging is hard. Some people, it works really well for their brain. I can think of something to write every week and put it up. And some people, have one thing they want to write about. And so can we provide a place for that one? So we have this inundation of guest posts. Please do send in more if anyone's listening to this. If there's something you want to write about, we do really appreciate it. There's been some fantastic ones, recently. So that's eaten up a lot of our Fridays because we have this backlog and we don't want people's stuff sitting around for months and months. But to get back to your question, I don't know. I'm a sponge, basically. I tend to just bounce around a lot, and I see things and just trying to bookmark them of, oh, this is interesting, and I always try and keep it, at least fairly relevant to the community. Is it book related or library or if I can make that weird communication. I think that's my secret superpowers is making connections between disparate things of here's A and here's B, and you might not necessarily think what they have in common, but doing that. And same with people. I think of like, oh, you need to know this person, and I think those are both things that have been essential to my career of that sort of tangential. I don't know if that's the right word but seeing connections between things of that unexpected connections or connections between people that need to be made. And so I think that's just, when I just see something and then there's that sudden spark of, oh, this might be fun for a librarian to look at, or oh, what can I learn from, how they used to make crayons that would be meaningful to, someone publishing a journal. And I don't know. It's just how my brain works, I guess.
Absolutely. No, thank you for doing that. And I did not acknowledge, but I must acknowledge now, David, fantastic work on Scholarly Kitchen.
Yeah.
I think we've seen it. Obviously, I've seen it over the last, 18 odd years, and it's changed quite a bit. We have so many, like you mentioned, diverse voices. There's guest speakers doing fantastic posts. Yeah. And I think it's part of, I'm sure it is part of everybody else's, induction program. But we anybody coming from outside the industry, we would definitely ask them to, subscribe to it, read, and then, share. So yeah, it's great stuff. And
yeah, I'll put in a plug for the brief as well, which I was, for the last 4 years, Michael Clark and I have been writing together. That's where a lot of my writing has gone. I haven't written as much for Scholarly Kitchen because I've been so busy there, but I'm hoping once the new job calms down a little to start writing more for the Scholarly Kitchen. But I did feel a little odd since I was sort of writing for we did a poll years back in the Scholarly Kitchen saying, where do you get your news on publishing, community and industry, and number one was Scholarly Kitchen, number two is the brief, and I sort of felt like I'm, I don't know, William Randolph Hearst secretly running my empire behind the scenes of controlling the media in our industry. But I try and I try to use my power for good, I guess, and I know.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I truly appreciate that. I mean, a lot of us, we've got common groups on Teams. And one of us would immediately share that with a lot of excitement. Have you read this piece? And it applies to the brief as well. And it's just fantastic. It's amazing to kind of just get all of that, and also the detailing that goes behind it.
Yeah, not every post is for everybody, but there are things that are really important to everybody, and there are things that are really important to a very small niche, group of people. And I think those are both equally important to have those voices heard. And to have, conflicting opinions. And, there's a lot of stuff that's published in the Scholarly Kitchen that I don't agree with necessarily. But, I think it's important to have voices heard and have debate happening. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time, David. This has been a very thoughtful and wide-ranging conversation. A couple of things that really stood out for me is it's not just about, technology. Obviously, it will have a role to play, but there's the element of human judgment. There is the the fact that you spoke about the role and the importance of curation, quality over quantity in the longer run. And it's all about making deliberate choices around value, trust, sustainability. So thank you so much, David, for your time, for sharing some amazing insights.
It's great to talk to you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for our listeners across publishing, research, policy, the takeaway is very clear. Success in this space will depend not just on innovation or some technology, but on judgment, strategy, collaboration, long-term thinking, equity. And I hope all of our listeners enjoy this episode. Please subscribe and share it with your colleagues. Until next time, this is Insights Exchange.